Welcome to The Dark Docket, the podcast where we explore the fascinating intersection between the law, the supernatural, and the macabre. I'm your host, Aidan, and tonight, for our Season 2 finale, we are going to continue our theme from last week's episode, that the normal can often be stranger than the paranormal. This is especially true when we look at government activities. Governments exist to provide security and stability for their citizens, but the lengths that they will go to achieve those aims often lead to some truly bizarre endeavors. Put on your tinfoil hats, hide your cell phones, and avoid looking at those weird lights in the sky as we dive into some true cases of government operations that will give you goosebumps. Before I'm kidnapped and brought to a black site, let's review our disclaimer. Nothing you hear on this show should be construed as legal advice. If you're facing a legal issue, please consult with a qualified attorney, duly licensed in the appropriate state. Furthermore, while we strive for accuracy, we can't guarantee the complete historical validity of all facts and stories presented. Some details may be dramatized or simplified for narrative effect. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. But remember, we're here to spark your imagination, not to solve your ghostly legal disputes. Our first case, which sounds like something out of the Twilight Zone, involves several U.S. soldiers stationed near the heavily guarded border between North and South Korea, also known as the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Their fateful decision to betray their country would place them directly in the hands of an autocratic government bent on brainwashing its own people, and would provide them with new careers as movie stars. Our tale begins on a cold night in January 1965. Sergeant Charles Robert Jenkins and two other American soldiers stationed at the DMZ with the 8th Cavalry Regiment made a decision that would alter the course of their lives forever. For months, they had been hearing invitations to seek asylum being played over loudspeakers across the border. Fearing deployment to Vietnam and about a dozen beers deep, Jenkins, along with his co-deserters, abandoned their posts and walked across the DMZ into North Korea. Jenkins' plan was simple, although misguided. He intended to seek asylum with the Soviet Union and eventually return to the US via a prisoner exchange. However, fate had other plans. Instead of finding his way to the Soviets, Jenkins found himself a prisoner in North Korea. He and the other servicemen were captured, tortured, and interrogated. Rather than 3 square meals a day and a serviceable bed behind bars, Jenkins experienced a life of hardship, unprovoked beatings, and forced labor. This continued for 6 years until 1972, when the men were declared citizens and given their own homes. Despite the improvement in conditions, they were still subject to surveillance and random assaults. But here's where Jenkins' story takes a truly bizarre turn. Throughout the 50s and 60s, the purportedly great leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, had been grooming his own son to eventually take over as the country's leader. His son, Kim Jong-il, had managed to dutifully rise through the ranks of the North Korean government to eventually join North Korea's propaganda and agitation department in 1966. Shortly after, he became director of the Motion Picture and Arts Division. Kim Jong-il was a massive movie fan. In fact, it is believed that by the time of his death in 2011, he had amassed the largest action movie collection in the Eastern Hemisphere. Taking after Joseph Goebbels, Kim knew how powerful movies could be as a tool for influencing and controlling audiences, something essential to bolster his father's autocratic regime that routinely subjected its people to starvation, imprisonment, and execution at will. Kim Jong-il wanted to create movies that would distract the North Korean people from their dire circumstances and even encourage them to blindly sacrifice themselves for his father's regime. He wanted to use movies to enforce the government's fallacious stance that North Korea was a free and just nation set upon by imperialist Westerners and their puppet regime in South Korea. However, a major problem with this plan is that action movies need bad guys, and to say the least, North Korea had a major shortage of white Westerners they could cast in movies. Actually, North Korea had a major shortage of any trained actors they could cast in movies. This led Kim Jong-il to arrange for the kidnapping of a famous South Korean actress and her movie director husband around the same time that Jenkins deserted. Hence, Sergeant Jenkins' new career as a North Korean movie star began in 1978 when Kim Jong-il cast him and his two co-deserters in a 20-part propaganda film called Nameless Heroes, or Unsung Heroes. In this series, Jenkins played the villainous Dr. Kelton, an American warmonger and capitalist living in South Korea. His character's motivation was to keep the conflict between the two Koreas going so he could generate profits for US arms manufacturers. Imagine the surreal experience of walking down the street of Pyongyang and being recognized as the main villain of the only movie playing in cinemas. On top of a home, salary, and public recognition, Jenkins' celebrity status afforded him some extra privileges, including interactions with Soviet diplomats who secretly provided him with information from the outside world. In 1980, Jenkins' life took another unexpected turn when he was assigned to marry Hitomi Soga, a Japanese woman who had been abducted by North Korean agents. Despite the forced nature of their union, Jenkins and Soga formed a genuine bond, having 2 daughters together. Jenkins continued to star in action movies alongside the other 2 Americans for several decades, with his final North Korean film role occurring in 2000, where he portrayed a U.S. Navy captain in a movie about the North Korean capture of the USS Pueblo, an incident that was a source of great pride for the North Korean regime. Jenkins did not take to stardom the way his co-deserters did, though. He knew that his life and the lives of his family were always at risk under the North Korean regime, and any privileges or security they enjoyed could be taken away in an instant. The opportunity for escape came in 2002 when Jenkins' wife was allowed to visit Japan. She chose not to return to North Korea. After diplomatic negotiations, Jenkins and his daughters were permitted to leave North Korea in 2004, reuniting Jenkins with Soga in Indonesia before settling in Japan. On September 11, 2004, Jenkins turned himself in at Camp Zama, walking up to the guard at the gate and announcing who he was. This set the stage for one of the most unusual court-martials in U.S. military history. Jenkins' trial took place on November 3, 2004. As arranged in a plea deal, he pled guilty to desertion and aiding the enemy. The court sentenced him to 30 days of confinement, demotion to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and a dishonorable discharge. Jenkins only spent 25 days in the brig, though, gaining early release for good behavior. But there's more to this story than meets the eye. In a 2009 interview, Jenkins claimed that his light sentence was all a big setup for the outside world. He stated that he actually spent his time in prison working with military intelligence, providing them with valuable information about North Korea. Throughout his years in the highly isolated country, with unprecedented access to the highly reclusive and secretive regime, Jenkins had amassed a wealth of vital intelligence. After his release, Jenkins settled in Japan with his family, working at a local museum and becoming something of a local celebrity. He even wrote a memoir called The Reluctant Communist, detailing his experiences. Jenkins passed away in 2017, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most unusual figures in the annals of military justice and international intrigue. Jenkins remains the longest-serving deserter in U.S. military history to return to duty. The case of Charles Robert Jenkins stands as a testament to the strange twists life can take and the complex interplay between personal choices, geopolitics, and justice. It raises fascinating questions about redemption, the nature of captivity, and the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator. Indeed, stories like that of Sergeant Jenkins involving international controversies can make one feel like a very small cog in a much larger machine. However, it's important to understand that there are always bigger fish in the sea, or perhaps bigger beings in the universe. We turn next to the recent out-of-this-world congressional hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, more commonly known as UFOs. On November 13, 2024, the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability held a hearing titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, Exposing the Truth. This hearing featured testimony from several high-profile witnesses, including former military officials and government employees, who made bold claims about UAP sightings and alleged government secrets. Before we discuss the key moments and claims from this extraordinary hearing, it's important to know the difference between a congressional hearing and a case in court. A congressional hearing, like this one about UAPs, differs from a typical legal proceeding in several key ways. For example, witnesses are allowed to present second-hand information and make claims without providing concrete evidence, which would not typically be admissible in court due to evidentiary rules such as the rule against hearsay. The questioning at a congressional hearing can also lack the rigorous cross-examination you'd see in a courtroom. In a trial, it's incumbent upon attorneys to challenge witnesses' credibility and probe for inconsistencies in their testimony. Furthermore, in a criminal trial, the prosecution must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil cases, it's a preponderance of the evidence, or more guilty than not. This congressional hearing had no such burden of proof. The focus was more investigative. Hence, it allowed for testimony that would be more speculative. In court, expert witnesses must be qualified and their testimony must meet specific standards of reliability. A congressional hearing tends to allow for more latitude in terms of who can testify and what subjects they can speak to. While courts have procedures for handling classified information, this hearing repeatedly bumped up against claims of classified material that couldn't be disclosed. This would be less likely to occur in a typical court case. Also, unlike a court case, this hearing didn't result in a verdict or legally binding decision. It's important to note, however, that the claims made in this hearing were made under oath, so there was at least some obligation on the part of those giving testimony to remain truthful. That being said, this hearing set the stage for some revelations that sounded like they came straight from the X-Files. David Grush, a former U.S. intelligence official, reiterated his claim that the government is absolutely in possession of UAPs. He cited interviews with 40 witnesses over 4 years, alleging a multi-decade Pentagon program to collect and reconstruct crashed UAPs. While Grush didn't provide specifics due to classified information, he also maintained his previous claim about non-human biologics being found at UAP crash sites. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean little green men from another planet. Biologics, as defined by the FDA, can be a diverse range of products like blood, cells, proteins, sugars, or acids derived from living organisms. Non-human refers to anything not of human origin, such as animals or plants, but still can originate from Earth. Bird droppings, for example, could constitute non-human biologics. Luis Elizondo, a former U.S. counterintelligence officer, emphasized the need for a whole-of-government approach to studying UAPs. He called for the creation of a national UAP strategy and protections for whistleblowers who want to come forward with information. Elizondo suggested that some of the advanced technologies seen monitoring sensitive military installations in the US could be operated by extraterrestrials, private companies, or possibly both. He also backed up the claim that the US government has programs to retrieve crashed UAPs and reverse engineer them. Retired US Navy Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet made the bold statement that UAPs represent a new realization that we are not the only advanced intelligence in the universe. He believes they are evidence of a non-human higher intelligence. Former NASA Associate Administrator Michael Gold stressed the need for NASA to contribute its expertise toward analyzing UAP data. He suggested using artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to sort through NASA's massive archive of data for potential UAP evidence. Journalist Michael Schellenberger testified about an alleged secret program within the US government called Immaculate Constellation, which he claims is designed to collect, censor, and quarantine UFO and UAP reports from military personnel. It should be noted that the Pentagon has denied some of the allegations made during the hearing. There are experts who suggest that many UAP sightings may have conventional explanations as well, including the possibility of other nations utilizing advanced technologies. For example, Chinese weather balloons have been observed flying in US airspace above critical infrastructure sites. More recently, there have been reports of drones also flying above critical infrastructure in New Jersey. Meanwhile, it is no secret that China and other countries have been experimenting with drone swarm technology. If UAPs do in fact represent advanced technology, whether extraterrestrial or otherwise, the implications for science and technology are profound. As Luis Elizondo suggested, some of these advanced technologies could be far beyond our current understanding and could serve to revolutionize advances in propulsion systems and energy production, and new insights into physics, potentially challenging our current understanding of the universe. The opportunity for technological leaps could transform various sectors, solving some of our most pressing global concerns. If we were to confirm the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, this would have far-reaching philosophical and religious implications as well. It would force us to reevaluate our place in the universe and the uniqueness of human consciousness. It could potentially unify humanity under a shared cosmic perspective, or, conversely, create new divisions based on how different groups interpret this new reality. New legal and ethical frameworks may need to be developed to answer questions such as, how would we establish communication protocols with extraterrestrial intelligence? What rights, if any, would be extended to extraterrestrial beings? And how would we handle potential technology transfer, ensuring it benefits humanity as a whole as opposed to the wealthier, most powerful nations? All of these questions remain open, and we still seem to be left with something akin to Fermi's paradox. Despite the exceedingly high probability, given the vastness of the universe, that intelligent life exists elsewhere, why has our experience of extraterrestrial life been relegated to brief sightings of unidentified objects? Where are the attempts to communicate with us? Why not send humanity a selfie from space? Or perhaps this has already happened, and governments have worked hard to keep that knowledge from the general public. Either way, we should remember the warning from the late physicist Stephen Hawking that if humanity's history is to teach us anything, whenever different cultures and people meet for the first time, it usually ended in bloodshed as one side attempted to conquer the other. Maybe we are better off leaving some secrets in the dark. Continuing our discussion of mysteries surrounding potentially new technology, governments employ a variety of creative means to secure their power and their citizens. There is no field that demonstrates this better than the battlefield. Since the ancient Greeks devised a giant wooden horse to defeat the Trojans from within the walls of their own city, nations have competed with each other to bolster their military capabilities by any and every means necessary, including the downright strange. Consider the field of PSYOPs, or psychological warfare. Some noteworthy examples include Britain using a ghost army of inflatable tanks and fake aircraft to convince the Germans that they had a larger fighting force during World War II. Later on, the CIA took advantage of local myths surrounding a vampiric monster called the Aswang while fighting communists in the Philippines. Then, there was Operation Wandering Soul in Vietnam, where recordings of supposed spirits were played in the jungle in an attempt to scare and demoralize North Vietnamese troops. This short list, however, doesn't even scratch the surface. While PSYOPs are particularly effective because it involves using the enemy's own mind against them, wars are not fought and won with tricks alone. Turning to the field of weapons development, a new weapon based on unique and unheard of technology can have a crucial impact in conflicts. Sometimes, a weapon is too unique. For example, in World War II, before the US built the atomic bomb, it had been experimenting with a bat bomb, a bomb that would release a colony of bats carrying flammable materials. The bats would deploy and then roost in the roofs of Japanese buildings, spreading fires and devastation across densely populated cities. On May 15, 1943, shortly before the bomb was supposed to undergo testing, several bats escaped from the bomb and set fire to the Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico, resulting in the project being scrapped shortly after. Depending on how one looks at the bat bomb, it was either a complete failure or too successful. Interestingly, bats were not the only winged creature the Allies attempted to work into their ordnance. A pigeon bomb was also developed under the guidance of B.F. Skinner, the famous behaviorist. Arguably, the perfect weapon is one that achieves its purpose and leaves no evidence that a weapon was even used. We turn now to the controversy surrounding Havana Syndrome. Our story begins in late 2016 in Havana, Cuba. U.S. and Canadian diplomats at the U.S. Embassy started experiencing bizarre symptoms: severe headaches, dizziness, hearing loss, and cognitive issues. These incidents quickly became known as Havana Syndrome. Cases were not limited to Cuba either. Over the next few years, similar incidents were reported by U.S. personnel in China, Russia, and even on American soil. By early 2022, over 1,000 possible cases had been reported worldwide. Believed by many to be attacks by foreign adversaries using some form of directed energy weapon, the public stance of the American intelligence community begged to differ. Even as late as March 2023, an American intelligence community assessment concluded that it was very unlikely that a foreign adversary was responsible for the reported incidents. Partially due to this continuing unwillingness to publicly acknowledge the possibility that the unusual symptoms associated with Havana Syndrome may be the result of adversarial activities, one of the first legal hurdles faced by Havana Syndrome victims was obtaining proper medical care and compensation. Many affected diplomats and intelligence officers found themselves in a bureaucratic nightmare, struggling to prove their injuries were work-related. Some Canadian diplomats, as well as employees of the CIA and NSA, have even filed lawsuits against their respective governments. In response to the challenges faced by victims, Congress passed the Havana Act in 2021. This legislation, signed into law by President Biden, authorized additional financial support for those suffering from brain injuries related to these mysterious incidents, without commenting on the cause of these injuries. The Department of Labor took steps to facilitate healthcare access for those claiming to be suffering from an anomalous health incident, or AHI. DOL issued guidance to simplify the process and ease the burden of proof for applicants and their claims. However, support from an employee's home agency remains important to substantiate a workers' compensation claim in the federal government. Notably, as of December 31st, 2023, CIA had not concurred with any AHI claims about the facts pertaining to their employees' injuries. This resulted in AHI claimants from CIA having lower approval rates for workers' compensation claims compared to claimants from other agencies. Only 21% of AHI applicants from CIA had been approved for workers' compensation, in contrast to 67% of AHI applicants from other U.S. government agencies. This has arguably led to a trust deficit between the CIA and portions of its workforce. Moreover, many AHI claimants from CIA have expressed distrust in the agency, with some perceiving that their careers were negatively impacted for reporting an AHI or seeking support in the first place. Given the U.S. government's initial response to Havana syndrome being criticized as inadequate and disorganized, in 2024, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, released a report highlighting ongoing issues with patient communication and care coordination within the Department of Defense's treatment program for Havana syndrome victims. Bureaucratic red tape aside, the lack of scientific consensus on the cause of Havana syndrome has also complicated matters. Several clinical research studies have been conducted on AHI claimants, including studies from the University of Miami, University of Pennsylvania, and NIH. All of these studies indicate that, at the group level, AHI reporters have clusters of symptoms that cannot be easily explained by known illnesses. Furthermore, the investigation into Havana syndrome has involved sensitive information about diplomats, intelligence officers, and their families. This has led to a delicate balancing act between the need for transparency and the protection of employee rights and national security interests. However, despite the American intelligence community being close-lipped about the true nature of these cases, recent investigations have revealed that these incidents may have a much longer history, potentially dating back to the Cold War era. The Havana syndrome incidents have a fascinating historical precedent known as the Moscow Signal. This was a microwave transmission that the KGB directed at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow from 1953 to 1976, resulting in health issues among embassy staff that share striking similarities with the current AHI cases. The Moscow Signal consisted of microwave transmissions varying between 2.5 and 4 gigahertz. These low-power signals were detected during routine background radiation testing in 1953 and were traced to a source in an apartment building about 100 meters east of the 10th-floor U.S. Embassy. The thinking at the time was that the KGB was attempting to use this signal to interfere with communication broadcasts originating from the U.S. Embassy. The energy beams primarily targeted the east side of the building, with the highest intensities recorded between the 3rd and 8th floors. Interestingly, the microwave transmissions caused an irradiance in the embassy of only 5 microwatts per square centimeter, which is 1,000th the maximum permissible leakage from a microwave oven, and far below what would be needed to heat anything. However, these signals were 100 times more powerful than the Soviet Union's maximum exposure standards, raising concerns among U.S. officials. The U.S. government's response to the Moscow signal evolved over time. In 1953, the initial signal was detected. In 1964, Over 10 years since initial detection, shielding against the microwaves was put in place. In 1969, the US government initiated the classified Pandora program, and the DARPA Pandora Scientific Committee discussed plans to expose human subjects to radiation similar to the Moscow signal. However, human testing was not pursued, and the program was shut down later that year, concluding that any effects would be too subtle or insignificant to be evident. In 1975, the Moscow signal beams were found to have increased in intensity. Then, in February 1976, the discovery of these microwaves was finally acknowledged to the public and many embassy personnel. In 1976, the U.S. Department of State commissioned a study led by Abraham Lilienfeld from Johns Hopkins University. This study compared Moscow embassy staff and their families with those from other Eastern European U.S. embassies. The report, released in 1978, concluded there were no adverse health effects, though this conclusion has been disputed. A 2019 Spanish study, based on the 1978 data with declassified information and new statistical analyses, found that Moscow embassy employees in 1976 had a higher cancer mortality rate than the general population and overall worse health than other European embassy employees. Concurrently, there were some concerning incidents, such as Ambassador Walter Stossel falling ill in 1975, with symptoms including bleeding from the eyes. He later died of leukemia. Multiple other ambassadors and embassy staff died of cancer, though no scientifically plausible link has been demonstrated between non-ionizing radiation and elevated cancer risk. Returning to recent times, in March 2024, a groundbreaking investigation by 3 news outlets, 60 Minutes, Der Spiegel, and The Insider, identified credible links between AHIs and the activities of Russian operatives from Unit 29155. Unit 29155 is a Russian military intelligence, or GRU, outfit responsible for assassination and destabilization operations aimed at European countries. This revelation has reignited the debate about foreign involvement in these incidents. If AHIs are indeed the result of intentional attacks by a foreign adversary, it raises serious questions under international law. Could these incidents be considered an act of war? And without a smoking gun, how would we be able to prove that a specific foreign adversary was responsible for these harms? As the AHI and Havana Syndrome saga continues to unfold, it serves as a fascinating case study in how our legal systems adapt to confront the unknown and unexplained. It's clear that flexibility and compassion will be key in addressing the needs of those affected, while maintaining the rigorous standards necessary for national security. As we conclude our review of strange government activities and their legal implications, I invite you to stay true to the curiosity that first brought you to listen to this show. The world is a wonderfully weird place that is equal parts terrifying and inspiring. Despite Homo sapiens having lived on this planet for 200,000 years, there is so much left for us to discover and learn. Don't get me wrong, science has come incredibly far since its inception and continues to advance at breakneck speed. However, it is almost certain that at least some of what we claim to know today will be proven wrong at some point in the future. There truly are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Consider the topics that have been subject to a change of consensus in your lifetime. Maybe Pluto was considered a planet when you were growing up, or human activity was not accepted as the primary cause of global warming. Whatever we think we know, we must continue to challenge our assumptions and follow where the best available evidence might lead us. Thank you for joining us for our Season 2 finale. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Dark Docket on whatever venue you tune in on. If you know of any interesting legal cases that involve the supernatural or the strange, please feel free to write to us at darkdocket@gmail.com. I would say join us next time, but in all honesty, I don't know if there will be a next time. Until then, remember, whatever bizarre, peculiar, mystifying, or inexplicable cases we might encounter, there will always be room on the Dark Docket.